If you wanna shout, wanna right some wrong, you can sing about it in a righteous song. And if you want a way to raise your voice up high, you can be a singer in the justice choir. If you are a citizen heavy of heart, you can take a tenor or an alto part. You can be a flame in a great big fire. You can be a singer in the justice choir. Sing out, make a better world, make a sound wave like a flag unfurled. Sing out like a liberty bell, ring out the truth you tell.
Hello, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Westside Congregation. We are glad you are joining us for our service today. I am Diane Stevens. Our speaker today is Stacy Gepicke. Our program is titled The Value of a Life in a Capitalist Society. It is founded on principle number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We hope you gain a deeper understanding of how these are at work in our lives through the materials presented here today. Today, we thank Carol Eaglehart for her work in taping and compiling our video. If this is your first encounter, we welcome you. We're glad you found us online, and we hope you will continue to connect with us in the future. If you have any questions about our congregation, please contact Reverend Dr. Nancy Hitt, our consulting minister. She can be reached at ministeruuwc@gmail.com. We have some announcements today. Today, Sunday, October 18th, there will be a Zoom town hall meeting at 12:30 p.m. You will receive a link in your email. Our primary issue to discuss is whether or not to offer New Mexico Black the use of our site outdoors for future rallies. NM Black is a local anti-racist organization whose last rally was on public property in Rio Rancho and was met by protesters, many of whom were legally armed. They canceled their event so that they could keep their people safe. NM Black had intended to have several speakers, do voter registration, and census reporting. Because UUWC is private property, we may be able to offer them a safer place. Please come to the meeting prepared to discuss this issue and vote on it. Your voice matters. This question comes to you by way of the social justice team and your board. It is based on principles 1, 2, 5, 6. Other issues will also be discussed as they were brought to the attention of the meeting. The committee thanks you for your responses to the 2021 Stewardship Campaign and commends your efforts to sustain the West Side community. We have a sad announcement that Robert Gardner died Wednesday night. The Reverend Dr. Hitt will give memorial plans soon. Please join us in lighting our chalice as the words appear on your screen. We light this chalice, symbol of our purpose to bring more love and justice into the world. We light this chalice, knowing our congregation's a church dispersed across communities, not bound by walls, but connected through the web of life. Please join me now as we affirm our aspirations together. The words will appear on your screen. Life is a gift. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and mysteries of this great gift. In the light of truth, in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Shalom. I invite you now to join me in a moment for centering. Sit back and relax into your seat. Uncross your ankles, wrists, and knees. Close your eyes gently if you are comfortable doing so, and listen to Lift Every Voice and Sing. I invite you to sit with the emotions that may rise with this beautiful song.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who has brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Please open your eyes and return to this moment. It is our custom each week to share some of our joys and concerns with each other as we build a network of our community. If you have a personal joys and concerns candle at home, draw it closer to you now. I will invite you to light it as we light our final white candle together in a few moments. We light a candle of sorrow for Mike and Matt Kane, who are in Texas to attend the funeral for Mike's mom. We light a candle for Robert Gardner, who died Wednesday night. We light a candle of concern for Nancy Gardner as she navigates the days ahead. We light a candle for joy for our evolving sense of ourselves in our online community. As we continue to grow through the pandemic, we are glad for new opportunities and ways of being West Side together. For all that we still hold in our hearts and minds, we light this last white candle together. For all the victims of racial violence, for those whose pain has gone unheard, unseen, unacknowledged, we light this red candle to honor their struggle and their lives. Shalom.
Hi, this little dog says, just as we chase our tails, we often chase our problems around and around, never getting anywhere but dizzy. When things get to be too much, stop what you're doing, put it aside, and try again another time. To be refreshed is to be refocused. And this other little dog says, whenever I hear a dog bark on the TV, I bark and bark and bark. But the dog on the TV never barks back. Probably because a lot of celebrities are really stuck up.
You matter. There is no one like you, never will be again. From the birth of the earth to its outermost end. You, an eager shout, a sacred yes, that moves your flesh, your bone, your breath. You, she, he, ze, they, you are whole and okay, gracefully teaching your truth and your way. You cannot be forgotten. We cherish you so. Your voice and your hands can do more than you know. You see old things anew. You turn them and test them. Your wonder exhausts our old words to express them. You speak and lay bare all you dig up and hold, aloft from the dust of conventions grown cold. You upend every rock and pursue every glimmer and give a new name to each sparkle and shimmer. You chart out new paths, go beyond our horizons, new friendships, new stories, your hope always rising. You welcome and wanted whatever your skin, wherever the neighborhood you were born in. You play across fences that keep us divided, old walls become weak where your love is ignited. You call us to kindness and questions, reminding the life of our living is found in the finding. You, there is no one like you, never will be again, from the birth of the earth to its outermost end. You matter, you do. We'll keep learning with you. Now stand on our shoulders, see what you can do. How is it with your soul? This is the question that John Wesley, Anglican priest and founder of Methodism, was known to ask of participants in small reflection groups. I ask you because for me, this has been a hard week. So beloveds, how is it with your souls? If your response to that question is anything like mine, I want to invite you to pause as you read this. Take a deep breath, say a prayer, sing a song, light your chalice, feel the force of gravity pulling us all toward the same center, whatever helps you feel more rooted and less alone. Now do it again and again and again. And once you feel that rootedness and connection, hear this. You are loved beyond belief. you are enough. You are precious. Your work and your life matter, and you are not alone. You are part of a we, a great cloud of witnesses, living and dead, who have insisted that this beautiful broken world of ours is a blessing worthy of both deep gratitude and fierce protection. Our ancestors and our descendants are beckoning us, compelling us onward and upward toward greater connection, greater compassion, greater commitment to one another and to the earth. Together, we are resilient and resourceful enough to say yes to that call to make it our life's work in 1,000 different ways, knowing that we can do no other than bind ourselves more tightly together and throw ourselves into the holy work of showing up again and again to be part of building that world of which we dream, but which we have not yet seen.
I am happy to share with you the information that we are currently in good financial shape. Your loyalty and responsibility are doing an excellent job of keeping Westside going during the pandemic. We thank you for your contributions. Our mailing address is P.O. Box 15146, Rio Rancho, 87124.
Today, we ponder what is the value of a life in a capitalist society. What does it say about a society that looks at every aspect of life through the lens of monetary cost and gain? Who do we want to be as a society? I think that before we can see where we are, we have to see where we started. Our nation got its start through betrayal, bloodshed, enslavement, and income disparities. The original colonists came to these shores to escape religious persecution. Many of the poorest colonists were escaping debtors' prisons by becoming indentured servants for a period of years until their debt was paid off. While the religious climate varied by the colony, the social system was very similar, although wealthy planters replaced the noble class, and indentured servants and poor workers replaced servants and serfs. As indentured servants gained their freedom, the wealthy landowners needed more workers, and they turned to the slave traders. We all know the well-written words of Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. However, the people they envisioned as having the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were white men. Women were considered property of their fathers and then their husbands. They were unable to own property, have their own money, or retain custody of their children if their husband decided to set them aside. They had no body autonomy. Their body belonged to the husband to use at will, and they had no control over the size of their family. Black people were considered 3/5 human and could therefore be bought, owned, and sold on a white man's whim. The indigenous people who had saved the first colonists from starvation and freezing to death in this hostile new land were repaid through betrayal. They were deemed to be inhuman savages, and their lands were stolen. They were murdered, and bounties were paid on their scalps. The stain of slavery lasted until 1865. After the slaves were freed, the old slave patrols became sworn law officers whose job was to enforce the new Black Code laws. If these codes were broken, then Black people could be arrested and sentenced to hard labor, often in the homes and farms they had gained freedom from. Sadly, this was only the beginning of the systemic racism and misuse of law. The Cherokee were forced to march the Trail of Tears, and many lost their lives as their land was stolen for white men to own and make a profit from. As white Americans marched westward and followed Jefferson's ideas of manifest destiny, the tribes they encountered were ambushed. The bison were decimated, not for food, but for the price of their skins and hides. The tribes were eventually forced off their land and forced to barren, scrubby lands and reservations. Their blankets were infected with smallpox. Their children were taken to re-educate, and the bounties on their scalps continued, including men, women, children, and babies. While this was ongoing, women had become more vocal about gaining suffrage. Many worked tirelessly for a right they would not live to see. Many were imprisoned, institutionalized in insane asylums, and many lost their children. The fight for suffrage continued into the 1900s. As the First World War came to a close, the battle for suffrage was fully engaged here. Women were jailed, beaten, force-fed, and the treatment for Black women was even worse. The fight paid off, and on August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment was finally ratified. Women finally had the vote, but they still could not take out a mortgage in their name, apply for credit, or open their own bank account. So they still did not have body autonomy, birth control was illegal, and they still could not legally tell their husband no. It was worse for Black people, with many large-scale massacres happening throughout Black communities. Black codes were strictly enforced, and Black people could be arrested for drinking from the wrong water fountain, eating at the wrong counter, or sitting on the bus. Black churches were bombed. Black men and boys were lynched for looking at white women.
Start with Black churches were bombed.
Black churches were bombed. Black men and boys were lynched for looking at a white woman. Schools were legally segregated until 1960, when Ruby Bridges bravely made her way through a screaming crowd with her police escort into kindergarten. Schools are still segregated, but now it happens through school districting. Mothers who lie about their address to try and get their children into better schools have been charged with fraud and theft of services and sentenced to years in prison. And because they now have a felony conviction, they lose their right to vote. Black men who served in World War II were denied benefits through the GI Bill when they returned home. They fought for their country, often fought their own countrymen who wanted to bring Black codes to Europe, and when they got home, they couldn't buy a home or go to school. For rich white men in this country, life continued as usual. Capitalism worked very well for them. They got richer off the hard work of others. They could pay for someone else to be conscripted into military service, and they faced little risk or hardship. Laws and lawmakers worked for them, and the common man had little representation. Poor white men had a perceived higher stature than Black men, immigrants, and women. However, that higher stature couldn't keep them off the battlefields or out of the mines. The mine owners got rich, and the miners got black lung and a slow, painful death. Black people were still arrested for black code violation. Black men are still incarcerated at much higher rates and with longer sentences than white men, and often worked jobs deemed too demeaning for whites. When they were drafted for war, they were often in units poorly equipped for survival in any battle. They were disposable, especially after defense companies began making profit off of war budgets, even in peacetime. Black men were and are still seen as a threat, most likely to fit a profile, and too often end up dead in encounters with police officers. Women finally achieved some level of equality in the 1970s. When birth control became legal, Roe v. Wade became law, they could now open bank accounts and apply for credit in their names. However, they still only make 78 cents for every dollar that men make, and Black women and women of color make even less. More disturbing is that the last state to make marital rape a crime didn't pass that law until the 1990s. Black men are still more likely to be charged with felonies and lose their voting rights, as well as fewer voting sites in Black communities, contributing to long lines. In 2001, in the wake of 9/11, the NFL decided to force the players onto the field to stand for the anthem. Before that, they stayed in the locker rooms. In 2016, Colin Kaepernick took a knee in protest, and the fans lost their minds. Colin was forced out of the NFL. The white team owners and white fans deemed it disrespectful to the military, and the NFL caved under financial threats. Move forward to 2020, and we are now dealing with the worst pandemic in 100 years. Federal leadership is absent, and the decisions on how to fight it are left to the states. The information that they needed was withheld, so as to not create a panic and a loss in the stock market. States were left to find personal protection equipment amidst a shortage. Some governors chose to do nothing, while others mandated masks, closures, and full lockdowns. These last measures were taken to prevent spread, flatten the curve, and try to keep hospitals from being overwhelmed. We watched in horror as the refrigerator trucks were brought into New York City, and their system was overwhelmed. Many medical providers lost their lives fighting to save others, as many screamed that this was a hoax and we needed to open the economy. Many were furloughed, with only essential workers allowed to go anywhere. Essential workers were determined by the need for their services. The obvious ones were in the medical field, first responders, and daycare for these workers. Truckers and grocery store workers. From March until October, the United States took over the top spot in the world for infections and deaths, as we hit and surpassed the 200,000 dead. Many of the dead are the very people who fought so hard to save others: the grocery store employees, the truckers, and those in childcare. Many of the last of that list making minimum wage without paid sick days or benefits. They have paid the greatest cost health-wise and through wages. We watched unmasked white protesters take to the streets in Michigan, heavily armed, screaming about reopening the state because they needed haircuts and hamburgers. What they really wanted was for someone else, usually a minority or someone making minimum wage, to risk their lives for their vanity and clogged arteries. These same protesters stormed a state capitol building, still heavily armed without masks, and were seen screaming into the faces of the police. And somehow the police weren't afraid. Meanwhile, a black man just out for a run was hunted down and murdered, and his killers weren't arrested until public outcry after the video that the killers took was released. In Kentucky, Breonna Taylor was gunned down in her home after police did a no-knock warrant. However, the man they were looking for didn't live there, and they had him in custody at the time they broke into her home. One officer was finally charged, not with her murder, but with the damage done to the walls of her white neighbors. And in Minneapolis, we watched in horror as George Floyd died under the knee of a white officer. He placed his knee, pushed down with his hand on George's neck while George was prone, handcuffed and restrained by 2 other officers. For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, he begged for water. He begged to breathe. He begged for mercy. And in his final seconds, he called out for his dead mama. This ignited a firestorm across the nation. Even though Black, Indigenous, and people of color are at higher risk for severe cases of COVID-19, they felt the risk was worth it, and they took to the streets to protest, to proclaim that their lives mattered. Sadly, many whites once again focused on the destruction of property and lost revenue instead of the loss of life. Once again, they wanted to police the reaction of the oppressed to make it easier to ignore. As the year has progressed, we heard in taped interviews with Bob Woodward just how much was known about this virus back in January, how much was hidden, and we lost our beloved Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We are now watching a rushed confirmation hearing that puts healthcare, Roe v. Wade, and marriage equality in jeopardy. Once again, we are watching the interests of capitalism, of billionaires, taking precedence over the health and lives of the common person. It is the height of callous disregard to take healthcare and pre-existing condition protections away, especially during a pandemic. Big insurance companies, lawmakers, justices, and the rich will be okay, but the most vulnerable in our nation will be at great risk, and many lives will be lost because they cannot afford care. As this pandemic continues, families are having to make tough choices around the care and hybrid schooling of their children. Many are left to look for childcare that they cannot afford to pay for, asking for the best for their children while offering minimum wage to childcare workers, many of us women. If they cannot continue to work from home, many mothers are making the choice to quit because their husbands earn more. The burden of this pandemic is falling on the shoulders of the poorest in our country, while the rich tout the stock market as a sign of economic health. Let's revisit football. The NCAA and the NFL have reversed course and now allow players and teams to decide if they will stand or kneel. At many of the NFL games, lift every voice and sing has been sung before the anthem. The vocal minority now screams about disrespect, taking away scholarships and boycotting both. Both venues, however, realize that they will lose more revenue through merchandise and ticket sales if they go back to what was. The majority of us support the players in using their voices to help those who are not heard. The vocal minority want these players to risk themselves to entertain while staying in the lane these fragile white souls deem acceptable, so that they do not need to hear politically correct lessons in moral values. I wonder how we can get to that society that lives up to the ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How do we get to where we see the need to care for the weakest among us before the cost of the care? Can we get to where Europe is with their health care for all, livable wages, affordable schooling, and time off to relax? Will we ever get to a point where individuals and families don't have to choose between medicine and food, medical care or housing, and staying home to heal or having a job? As always, we extend a sincere invitation to you to respond to what you have heard and experienced here. Please use either our service webpage, our YouTube page, or our Facebook site to let us know what you're thinking and feeling about all that we've shared here. Thank you.
Please join me in extinguishing our chalice as the words appear on your screen. Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. From each of us in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparkling through space one to another, connecting us invisibly but palpably. We are one, and from every window our light shines.
We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connection. Our concerns, our care for each other, our service to each other, to the world, and to our faith continues. Until we are together again, friends, be strong, be well, be true, be loving.
Sing out at the tyrant's wall, sing until the last brick falls. If you wanna shout, wanna right something wrong, you can sing about it in a righteous song. And if you wanna wait or raise your voice up high, you can be a singer in the justice choir.